Overtime was created by Matt Holman, founder of the EMW Foundation, and is made possible by the Prodigy Media Group and RPM Athlete Performance, with inspirational credit to my friend, Dr. Fred Obi. Welcome to Overtime, an open conversation series on racism in the sport of lacrosse. We hope you find this thought-provoking, educational, and it leaves you better prepared as a member of the lacrosse community. Thanks again for joining us, and now for this week's panel. So welcome everyone to tonight's episode of Overtime. It's a candid conversation of lacrosse, about racism in lacrosse, I'm your host, Matt Holman. This is our 10th episode, which is awesome, and we've got a great group of current leaders at different levels of the game here tonight, and I'm just going to go through and introduce them, read off their quick bio, so excuse me. First, we have Coach Lars Tiffany, born and raised in Lafayette, New York, and was the first exposed to lacrosse by watching it played on the Onondaga Nation Reservation, He's a graduate of Brown University where he majored in biology. He's beginning his 5th season at the head coach at UVA. His prior years, he spent 10 years at Brown, 2 years at Stony Brook, and he is the NCAA champion in 2019, which means you're still the current champion, Coach, because we didn't have one. So thank you. Steve Stenersen, born and raised in Baltimore. He learned how to play the game with traditional wooden sticks in 3rd grade at the St. Paul School in Maryland. He is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill with a degree in journalism, and he had an ultimate goal of being a writer for New York Times. Steve is currently the CEO of US Lacrosse, and he serves on the board of World Lacrosse. So welcome, Steve. Miss Arielle Ramirez. She was born in Baldwin, New York. She began playing at the age of 11 and took her talents to the University of Hartford, where she is a communications major and current team member. When time permits, she coaches girls locally in her hometown, so welcome back. Mark Ellis. Mark was born and raised in Hempstead, Long Island, and found lacrosse in Garden City Middle School. He's a 2017 graduate in multidisciplinary studies from Stony Brook, and he earned his master's in exercise science from Hofstra University. He is currently an MLL player for the Long Island Lizards and the sports performance coach at Stony Brook University. So welcome, Mark. Next, we have Trevor Tyranny. Trevor is a 2001 Princeton graduate where he majored in psychology. He continued his studies, earning his graduate degree in psychology through Harvard Extension Program in 2018. And Trevor is the current VP at LXTC Lacrosse Club out of the Denver area. Coach Jim Stagnetta. Welcome, Coach. Another New Yorker, born and raised in Syracuse. Coach Stagnetta began playing his lacrosse career in high school, and he never stopped being involved. He served as a college coach for 28 years. 23 of them as a head coach, 7 years at the professional level. We congratulate Coach Stagnetta on his recent PLL championship win with the Whipsnakes. And he, in his free time, if he has any, he's a partner at Prodromus Leadership. Did I say that right, Coach?
Yep.
A little bit of a tongue twister. And it's a cool company that I looked up, and it's neat what you guys do. We welcome back Troy Kemp. Troy gained interest in lacrosse while attending Colgate University, and he transitioned into a successful coaching stint at the Tennessee high school level, where he earned 8 state titles, 3 Coach of the Year honors, and Troy currently serves as the Director of Recruiting of Nation United Lacrosse Club and is the Executive Director of the National Center for Development of Boys. And last but not least, standing in for Coach Meg Decker at University of Hartford is her assistant, Samantha Herman. And Samantha, I'm gonna have to let you give a quick bio because she literally just jumped in due to her pregnancy, not hers, obviously. And go ahead and just give us a quick recap of yourself.
Yeah, of course. I was born and raised in Bel Air, Maryland. I started playing lacrosse probably around the age of 4 years old. I graduated High Point University with a degree in exercise science in 2019, and I'm in my second season of being an assistant coach at the University of Hartford.
Awesome. You and Mark can trade notes, I think. So let's get started. You know, the conversation is racism in general in the sport. A couple of you submitted some really great questions, and I think we can start there, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. And these are open to the panel. So I think we should start with, what is the most important step we need to take to address racism in the sport? And I believe the we is just those in leadership positions, obviously on this call. And if I've butchered your question, please interrupt me, but I believe that's the we in that part. So it's an open topic if anybody wants to start. Or Arielle, if you want to start from a player's perspective, because I think it's kind of neat to hear what players are kind of missing, you know?
Yeah, I think, so you want me to answer?
From your point of view.
Or from my player point of view?
From your player point of view, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So being a player and being a athlete of color, you know, you kind of see stuff like that. I don't want to say terribly often. I feel like definitely as I've progressed with the game, it's lessened, and maybe that's about the level of competition I'm playing at, or like the maturity that people now have, or the lack thereof. But personally, I think it's really important to just take advantage of teachable moments. So for lack of better words, just calling things out for what they are. A lot of times there are incidents that I don't even want to say go unnoticed, because I think we all notice them, but they go unpunished because it's good fun, or it's locker room talk, or all those terms that just don't mean what it is, which is racism. And it could be people saying things that maybe they don't even realize is racist, but that's why we have teachable moments, because that's an opportunity now for you to educate someone and help someone learn why what they said is not okay, because they're never going to stop saying something or doing something if they don't think there's anything wrong with it. Some people are going to keep doing things knowing things are wrong with it, but there are those people who just lack the knowledge. So people in leadership positions, that's kind of your responsibility, especially leading a team, a group of people, any type of leader. You're above people and you're handling a large group of people. For them to work as a cohesive unit, they all need to, I don't want to say get along, but have a general respect for each other, because we know that on teams, everyone isn't best friends with each other. But I think that's just where it starts, is respect. And yeah, so I think just being honest about what's happening and calling things out, essentially.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
Kind of just piggyback that, like, from obviously being a player, like in college and now at the professional level, I think it just has to understand that you have to notice, you have to say out loud that it's there. I think people just don't want to say it's out loud that it's there. And we're talking about sports, we put specifically lacrosse, that we all have our foot into. So I think for us, just understand, like, being a player of color, like, I'm coming into a locker room that majority does not look like me. So I think as a coach, as a person of leadership, you have to understand that and try to make that person feel as comfortable as possible. I'm not saying you have to change your culture, but you have to understand that the background and the cultural things might be different from the way you speak, from the way you wear your hair, little things like that may seem, in your culture may seem abnormal, but to other people's culture may seem just normal. A prime example is that when people wear dreads or people wear a do-rag or things of that nature, people might seem that the people that don't understand that might seem as a different view of, but it's like a different culture view. So I think that's a big part of it. And for us as leaders, I think we have to be open to it and have, like, one of those non-negotiable things in a locker room of obviously accepting people who they are. I guess you don't have to like everybody in a locker room, but you have to respect them at a woman and a man, and understand that the ultimate goal, we all want to win. I think we all want to win in all means necessary. But if I invest in somebody and get to know somebody, you talk about a culture change. That's what happens. If you want to make a really culture change, develop a girl from a woman and a boy to a man. That's what you do as a coach. That's your job. You're an educator as well. You're not only there to win games. You're here to someone's giving you their daughter, their son, and you have to groom them into becoming a better person at the end of the day. So I think that's what we have to realize is open up our hearts and open up our brains. Say, hey, I may not know nothing about this, but let me educate myself about that. And I think that's a little bit of what I think.
So it's interesting because being on this show a few times, you get that question and you get a chance to go back and reflect and really think about, this is about root cause, right? Because, you can be technical in your response, or you can be adaptive, which means you can change it where it shifts the entire paradigm. And so when I had two sub questions, it's why do they come and why do they stay when it comes to kids of color getting in the pipeline? Why do they start it in the first place? And then why do they stay? Because you can have kids that'll start, but they can have incidences that happen and so forth, and they'll just tap out at that point. Or you may have some kids that just may not start in the first place. And I looked at it and I said, okay, this can transfer. Look, I went to Colgate. When I went to Colgate, we were not that diverse in terms of a football team at the time. Now they're very different. But there was some issues that went on in our locker room, and it wasn't lacrosse, it was football. And so I said, what is the root cause? The root cause is the sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is this a sport that's for me from not only what I believe, because if a kid believes they belong or a player believes they belong, they're going to play fearlessly. They're going to have more motivation. There's research that shows that people are more motivated, but they also have a greater sense of agency and self-efficacy. I believe I can continue this to be at a very high level. So belonging the driver is, does my race, I don't see anybody that's like me. Does my coach even get me? Does the coach even know sort of anything about my neighborhood even, right? That kind of thing. Also in terms of socioeconomically, there's such a big gap between these youth programs and the elite programs where a lot of the colleges source their players from. They can't cross that bridge because it is a certain amount of investment that you have to make to even get there. And then there's the image side of it that says, even as a Black person, does my own community accept me in terms of, do I belong over there playing lacrosse versus doing something else? So if you don't have the sense of belonging, and it says, so who can do something about that? Well, that's one of the reasons why I went at it and says, you got to take the influencers in the community and educate them about lacrosse and how it creates access at a different level, not just income, right? And then the college coaches, making sure that the college coaches, who are the ones that people are kind of trying to get to, really understand, do you know what's coming when you have that child on your team or that young man or that young lady on your team? What do you need to know about that person for them to feel like they can completely belong? And what does the players need to know about each other to feel that way? Because it could be a socioeconomic thing and a race thing and a something else thing. So again, I'm gonna shut it down right here because I just planted some seeds because it's gonna grow somewhere in this conversation.
Yeah, I'll just chip in and say, Troy, I agree completely. I kind of see it as two separate and equally important challenges. One is to address the issue of accessibility in the sport, which is, some would say, I would say the sport's never been less accessible, given, how youth sports has evolved in society generally and how it's evolved with respect to lacrosse. There are a lot of people out there providing, from the club world, providing opportunities and really intentionally trying to include folks that really maybe can't afford the time or the money, but not enough, I don't think. So I think investing in increasing accessibility to the sport is critical. That's grants, that's supporting new programs in urban and rural areas that otherwise would never have the opportunity. The other side of it that I don't think, certainly my organization hasn't invested enough in at all, is the elimination of racism from the sport. Because as you point out, you can spend a lot of time, effort, and emotion trying to attract kids to the game who love the experience of playing, but who experience, to your point, racism and inappropriate culture and leave. And that's a complete waste of time, emotion, and resources. So I see it as a two-edged sword here. We've got to continue to invest in accessibility of the sport, but we've got to really lean into consistent policy, as Arielle was saying. You know, that's the biggest complaint that I hear is there's no accountability for behavior. There's no account. What happens to the kid in a tournament who says something? Does the official ignore it? If the official doesn't ignore it, what's the call? Is it unsportsmanlike or is it ejection? What's the protocol to address the issue within the tournament or the club? And there isn't any consistency there from what I've seen and heard historically. So I think certainly from my organization standpoint, I think that's one of the things we're starting to lean into is not only continuing to invest more in accessibility and trying to help new programs grow and existing programs evolve, but also lean into that racism and anti-racist policy that we need to establish within the sport that's never been there.
This is Lars. I'd love to dive in into some great points there, and thank you, Steve, for your thoughts. A couple things. One thing I would like to point out, having had some time to think about this summer and really reflect on the growth of the game and making it more accessible. Harlem Lacrosse has been very successful and has certainly expanded to 4 other cities now. And so they're someone who's been a model that others could follow. But I'm also wondering about what you were just saying, we could do support new programs or help existing programs grow. And I'm thinking with so many programs out there nowadays that aren't getting access to people of color, that aren't because of, not being aware of the sport, unavailable to getting access to equipment and such. I just think if resources were poured into communities that already have the game, that already have the coaches, that already have a schedule, as opposed to trying to branch out and starting always. And again, Harlem Lacrosse did a great job with that. So it's possible, but maybe it would take less energy, less funding. But, I talked to a lot of coaches, public high school coaches who, man, I wish I could have more kids on my team. There are 400 kids per class and I got, 23 kids on my team. And just the access to some of the kids who are fantastic athletes, who are focused on other sports, and how do we make that more accessible, and so giving attention to an area that maybe not needing as much resources, initially for the startup. And I love we're talking about the accountability for behavior and the elimination of racism from our sport, because I think that's the second piece of this. It's easy as a white man to say, I think we're pretty good, aren't we? We're good. And this summer also allowed a lot of us to really start reflecting on it. And whether it's through books like White Fragility, which is hard to read as a white man, to tell you the truth. It's because it makes me think. It makes me go like, it's just so much easier to go on my day. And so that education, as we were talking about earlier with Arielle and Mark, that, as leaders, we've got to educate our kids and make sure that, that when we do have a discussion about race, it's not a one-off. Like at the end of the year, I don't go like, okay, we talked about sexual harassment and sexual violence. We talked about race, boom, check that box. Okay, good. Now let's go become a better lacrosse team. But it's a part of our conversation, and consistently that we're addressing these type of issues. And so that's something that's critical. And you guys are right to talk about the leadership, because one of the favorite things for people to do is watch your boss. When you're at work, you watch your boss and you emulate him or her behavior, his or her behavior. And it's really important that as leaders we're emulating the right behavior. But just bringing this to the forefront and consistently bringing the message forward. So I just wanted to add those couple thoughts to what has already been brought up.
So I find this, it's fascinating because I come at it from so many different sides, right? I coach adults now. I still work with young kids, but I'm coaching men. I'm coaching coaches, right? I'm coaching guys who work on Wall Street. I'm coaching guys who are teachers, right? I'm coaching leaders. And I also come from it from the leadership standpoint. I work with professional athletes. I work with corporations. I work with colleges. And, this is particularly right now, it's such a dynamic situation. And I think that there's, and again, I've just been through with the PLL tournament and you know, the Black Lives Matter and the locker room. There's, you know, I've learned an awful lot from it, and really I can just, you know, simply pull from, you know, the leadership experience and kind of what we do with our partners in this, and that there's a difference between accepting and supporting someone in your locker room and having their back, and actually understanding and emphasizing with what their situation and their scenario is. And sometimes it's a fine line for a leader, because your goal is to get your team on the same page and get them working together and getting everyone to feel accepted and everyone to feel like they're part of something and they're understood. But sometimes you miss the fact that, you know, there's a piece of that where they you know, truly want you to understand and to be able to kind of speak to what their experience and support, you know, what their platform is. And, you know, there's a simple way to do that, I believe. And I think that that's fostered from the top. I believe that the culture is built from the people in the organization, because they're the ones, if they're building the culture, they're going to embrace it and it's going to be theirs, right? You got that rule of thirds. If you tell someone this is what our culture is, 1/3 are going to say, hey, that's great, coach is the man, I'm going to do what he says. 1/3 is going to be, yeah, I'll give it a try. And there's always that 1/3 that's going to rail against it. And some of you guys may be one of those thirds that rail against what, you know, what leadership says. But, you know, what I've found, and one of the things we always talk about is curiosity, right? There's, you know, what is supporting, you know, what is supporting your teammates of color, Black and brown? What does that look like? Because it looks different to everybody, right? Supporting it can be being accepted in the locker room and feeling comfortable and being involved in everything you do and the team does, because they accept you. But there's a part of it where, you know, taking it beyond the acceptance piece, right? Are you really supportive of, you know, of my movement, of what is going on out there? Or are you just supportive of me? And I believe it goes both ways. And I think there's two really important parts to that, right? So in order to have empathy and to truly understand, you have to ask questions and be curious, right? And I think we have to get our you know, our players, and in my case, it has a great impact because, again, they're teachers and coaches, to be curious and ask the questions, because so much of what's coming out right now, so much is what's on social media, and so much of what is out there comes from one perspective. All right, it is not an educated and informed perspective, and it's happening, I believe, on both sides. We are assuming if it's just one perspective, it just comes from you. It's what's in your head, right? And if we think about the first idea that we have in our head, it's usually negative. My wife doesn't come down and talk to me in the morning. I wonder what I did wrong. Very capable of doing something wrong, right? In the meantime, if I actually ask what's wrong, I find out it's my daughter in New York, it's my son in college, or it's my mother-in-law, right? 9 out of 10 times, it's something completely different than what I think. So unless we're curious and we ask the questions, when the answer comes, you have two choices. It's an opportunity to either educate, okay, I got it, but you're missing something here, right? Or it's the opportunity for you to adapt and say, you know what? You're right. I didn't think about that, nor did I know that. So I think it's impossible to really have empathy and to understand unless we're curious and asking questions. And I think what I found was happening, particularly at the professional level, and I find that it happens in corporations and I find that it happens in professional teams, is people aren't asking questions. If you truly want to solve the problem and you truly want to understand it, you actually have to ask questions. And you have to learn about what the situation is and how. The only way you can put yourself into someone's shoes and have empathy is if you're truly curious. And I think curiosity is so important in this. Okay, I get it. So tell me a little bit about this, right? Tell me why. So I'm making an informed decision, because I learned so much by just asking questions of friends and players, you know, things in perspectives that weren't my perspective, but they made perfect sense to me. And, you know, that's been a huge takeaway for me you know, through this COVID and through the riots and everything that's happened with George Floyd, just asking the questions. And I talk about that in everything we do, but now I think it's really important to do it. And that's the only way you're going to have uncomfortable conversations. Everyone says we have to have uncomfortable conversations. Well, you got to ask questions to have conversations. Does that make sense?
Coach, I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, this is, you know, and again, I have to be conscious of airtime because, again, that's the reverend in me that just kind of pops out and gets real. But the moment, man, you got to let that thing just roll with it. So interestingly enough, I think about this, and an analogy is what's happening with COVID-19, right? You got all these people saying certain things. You got people who are willing to send their kids to school, people who are not. You got the economy, you got this. Forget all the politics. Take all that off the table. But you have people, depending on where they are, they feel a certain type of way. For example, riots. If I take this bottle and I shake it up enough and something goes wrong or somebody just pops, they can put a pinhole in there, it's going everywhere. So depending on how the life you've lived and the number of wounds that you have and the history of your family and all that, you might react to some situation very differently than your spouse even. Because like someone says, a riot's necessary or not, that kind of thing. Now, no one would ever condone any violence or damage and so forth. But then you have, if you shouted and you yelled and you printed and you walked and you marched, or at least you've seen enough of that, and then a moment happens where you're not even rational at that moment because you turn around and you say, I'm tired. It's just like the guy, like I used to fight a lot as a child and I learned to stop doing that because it wasn't getting me, but at the moment it made me feel better because I was just tired. And so part of this is, like you said, Coach, is like there's an understanding that you have to have is everybody's not in the same place. And we got to be able to agree to disagree. But honestly, the people who help make that possible, I know we do it in the school world, is you got to create norms for communication and all those other things, because a lot of people don't have that built into the way they operate. So you got to create a space that's safe enough. And honestly, a lot of times you have to put the first chip in for them to think it's okay, right? The water's okay. It's not going, but it's not too hot. It's not too cold. This is what we got to do to basically understand each other. Because y'all know team dynamics, all it takes is some weird thing over here can take your team the wrong direction. And I talked to university coaches and PLL players when they were talking about the whole Black Lives Matter. What should I put on my body? I know that there's police, you know, people are talking about defunding police. My uncle's a police officer. I got all this stuff. It's conflict in there. And you're right. You know, just because it's printed on the internet doesn't mean that it's true, but you got to make informed decisions. Just like with COVID, you got to find out what's out there so you can, but if people are not talking, everybody's just coming up with their own opinion. And so again, it's incumbent upon people in the leadership roles to plow the field, to say, folks, we're going to make this is a priority. And again, your schedule and your budget speak to priority. If you just talk about it, don't mean anything. But what you make time for and what you put resources behind will tell you what's real.
So that's my question for you guys. How do you know, there's a lot of people out there that believe that people need to make public statements in order to be supportive of a movement. Yet there's a lot of, when I spoke to my former player, I mean, everyone from doctors to teachers, former players, and I asked them, hey, if you were me, right? Give me some insight. Tell me how you doing and tell me how you would handle this situation, right? Tell me what you would expect from people that care about you. And in everybody, there was no consistent answer to it, but what everyone said was, the one consistent part was, do what you're comfortable doing, right? It does not have to necessarily be a public statement, but when you're in a situation where something is wrong, or someone says something, or someone is mistreated, right? You got to be willing to act in that moment, because I believe there's a lot of people out there making statements, but I'm not sure they act in the moment, right? And that's what I want to instill in people, is that a comment is made that is wrong, and it's insensitive, and it's against what we should be believing in. Someone's got to speak up in that moment. You have to have courage, right? So, we got to be careful and find a way that we're not judging people based on what they say, but actually on the actions and what they do. And it's an old adage, but, I believe that there's a lot of people out there that are, that are doing good and trying to do good that don't necessarily need to make that public statement or need a light shed on them. So how do you balance that?
I think that a lot has to do with kind of going back what you said. Like, my issue is people feel too comfortable. You have to get uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
You have to realize that people are uncomfortable their whole lives in certain situations. I commend Coach Tiffany for, I think he's one of the few coaches at Division 1 level that came out loud and said Black Lives Matter. That means a lot to a lot of players. That means a lot to people in this university. I see him every day. So you have to understand that people are uncomfortable all the time. And the reason is because they feel they're not welcome. They feel like people don't have their support. And come to public, and the public figure at a professional level or at a doctor, you are a public figure. Some of those guys who decide not to speak publicly decided to put a black box of Blackout Tuesday. With that association, a lot of associations are, hey, like, you support us. And when it came down to the wire or on the patch or no patch, guys decided not to do some things or do some things. And that kind of made guys think twice, because you say one thing, you post one thing for the public eye, but behind closed doors, you feel a different way. So I think that's the issue with people are having. We feel uncomfortable. How can you help us? I think you have to feel uncomfortable some way to make some change. I think this conversation is a tough conversation for everybody. It's not comfortable for everybody. I don't think racism is an unquestionable thing to me. It should be no discussion about racism. We all want it ended, but we have to make progressions and make that happen. We can't just be comfortable. If it was comfortable, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But we have to get uncomfortable.
So what I wanted to say was just touching back to the point about the performative activism. So that would include things like the Blackout Tuesday post. And I'm not saying that if you participated in the Blackout Tuesday post, then you're only a performative activist. However, there were people who that was it for them. That was their level of participation. They checked the box, like, I stood up for the Black people and they heard me and they saw me, and that's all I really needed to do. So I think what you kind of were touching on was, do they need to say it or do they need to show it? And I think, I don't want to say it depends on your your platform, but for example, like Mark mentioned, it was a big deal for players and for people to hear Coach Tiffany say outright out his mouth that Black Lives Matter, but he could have posted that black square and been saying anything. So I think it really, I'm sure there are people who are not posting anything, but they might be in the field and they might be at the marches and in conversations, and that's all very valid. So I think you gotta find like the middle ground between publicizing your activism, because then it kind of makes it about you. Because when you think about it, like, I am a servant for this movement. So this is not about people knowing that I'm standing up or that I'm marching. It's about really like standing with the people that are standing up and that are marching. So for some people, like, the posting is making it like, look at me, I'm an activist, not like, this is the movement. And I think it especially becomes a greater conflict of interest when you're talking about like allies. So white men and white women who are standing with the movement. A lot of times that social media presence and your social media activism, all you're doing is drawing attention away from the actual movement, and you're saying the same thing as maybe 10,000 other people have been saying for so long. So it's just, I don't remember your exact words, but to paraphrase, you were saying like, calling things out, well, kind of like what I said, but calling things out when you have the opportunity. So standing up for someone when they're being mistreated, like, if people aren't comfortable I actually don't even want to let that pass, because Black Lives Matter is not a political statement. It has nothing to do with politics. It is literally the bare minimum, like to just admit that they matter. And the fact that people feel so uncomfortable saying that, like they're politically declaring something, I don't think I'm gonna say that that's okay. Like, it's not okay with me personally. So like you were saying, like, do what you're comfortable with. I don't see why admitting Black Lives Matter makes anyone uncomfortable, but it would probably make you uncomfortable if you were a racist. So that's what we're saying. Like, the thing about this movement and it actually moving anywhere is it's easy to say we need to destroy racism, we need to be rid of racism, but we have to unlearn racism, and the unlearning is the hard part of it. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there.
If I could jump in, I love all the points and questions that you all are raising. Matt, great job. You're putting together like a legit Hollywood Squares here. And I'll bet some of the younger guys in this group won't even know what Hollywood Squares is. I'm turning into like the Louis Anderson that's always here and not doing too much. But, you know, the thing that comes up for me is around social media and the things that go on in social media. Like, I ask myself this question all the time. Like, I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Instagram. The only thing I'm on is Twitter. I've decided to just stop following people. It allows me to be a little bit more creative with what I share, not kind of get caught up in these conversations, but share what's meaningful to me at that point in my life. And it's kind of taken me, you know, with all the political drama going on in the world, has taken me out of that. And but my point being in that a lot of times on social media is things are very black and white on all topics. There's no shades of gray. And a lot of people do things on social media to virtue signal. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves anytime we do anything is, what's my main motivation behind this goal? Is this for me to look good and to get praise from others? Or is this actually, as you're saying, Arielle, is this actually helping the movement move forward in some way? And how am I doing that in real life to back that up, as Coach Stagnetta is talking about? And I think, I forget the NFL commissioner's name, but he came out and said in an interview today, he said, listen, I made a mistake with Colin Kaepernick. I should have been more open to hearing what he was saying. And, you know, whether he's sincere or not, or whether he's been pressured into looking this way, he's now talking about more discussion and dialogue. I think the problem on social media is you can't have a lot of discussion and dialogue. It becomes a zero-sum battle of who's right and who's wrong in 140 characters or less. So that's why I've loved these things that Matt has set up, is it allows us to share the complexity of what we're seeing. One of the things that I've done with my group, LXTC Lacrosse, over the years is we've donated a lot of money at the end of each year. We scholarship kids to play in our programs at the youth level, and then we get parents to help pay their way for the high school. So we follow NCAA rules. And it goes to Coach Tiffany's point of existing structures that are already there. We don't have to create whole new programs, whole new things. We're already there in place where we can provide opportunities. And Troy does an amazing job with United, pulling kids from all over the country. But I have, you know, probably 2 or 3 great kids from Denver City Lax a year that I can add onto my class. And, you know, for Coach Stagnetta at the Hun School now, my alma mater, you know, Hun has done a fantastic job in the past 2 decades of getting great Black athletes for football and basketball as PGs to that school as an extra opportunity to prepare for college. I think the same should be done for lacrosse. So I think, you know, for me personally, I don't like to come out and signal to the world what I'm doing. I like to kind of do it behind the scenes. But I do take what you all are saying of, hey, we've got to kind of extend our hand a little bit so people see it. And final thing I'd say is I thought Dr. Opie, Dr. Fred's wife, Dr. Tina Opie, last time I was on, made a great point of we have to be careful of forcing people to say things online or forcing people to take a knee, because then does it lose its meaning if people are just being pressured into it. I think that was the gist of what she said. And, you know, I love the freedom of our country. If people feel like they need to stand or people feel like they need to kneel, I'm all for that. If people want to speak their mind on social media, I'm behind the freedom of people to say and think or say and do what they feel is right for them. But at some point, especially when you're a public figure, there's going to be a time when you have to explain yourself and show how you really feel, and also behind closed doors, be able to have those uncomfortable discussions and dialogue.
Do you think that as a leader, though, you're closer to the steering wheel of the bus, right? And that's a challenge, because when you think about systemic racism, it's not, you can have this personal, obviously you have people that have internalized it. But when you talk about institutional and systemic racism, you got to be closer to the steering wheel to make it happen, to make the turns. And so the challenge is when you're in leadership roles, I know as a Black athlete, just as a person in general, sometimes I have to look over my shoulder and just wonder, like, how are people, gangs have their colors, right? How you riding? You yellow, you green, you whatever. But the same thing when it comes to Black Lives Matter, sometimes when I walk past a yard in my neighborhood here in Atlanta, there's a little bit of everybody, but it's majority, well, actually it's a mix. But when I see a Black Lives Matter sign in the yard, and then I know there's white folks who are living there, somehow I feel different. Whether you love it or hate it, they could be showboating or whatever they're doing, but it's their property. And I feel a little bit safer in it, just whatever, right? Because I can't stop marching. I can't. If I wanted to, I can't, right? And then some people can decide to pull over because they're tired, or pull over because their reputation might go here. I'm not condemning people who don't speak up, because for myself, I sit there and I got to think about what I'm going to say before I say it. And it's not because I'm afraid, because you got to be courageous. But if you're going to be in a leadership position and you got to be able to make a call when there's 10 seconds left on the clock, or you got to be able to make a call whether you got to keep a coach in their role or not, or a scholarship decision, all that stuff you do that affect lives, there's also a responsibility too there to think about it, and not to do it just because it's a show up situation, but there's a follow up. I say don't make a statement if you don't have a follow up to it. What is your action related to your statement? That's really the thing, right? If you're going to say something, what are you going to do? Say something, do something. And do something could be, I need to upgrade my expertise on this matter to make sure I'm talking with a clear head. So it may not be, I'm going to institutionalize all these things on my team, but the first thing I'm going to do is work on me. And so you can always do that. You got the right to do that. So for me, it's not always this big grandiose statement, but it's usually about what's my action steps. And if I don't have an action, just hold your breath for a second and wait to see if there's something that I really think I can do personally or even institutionally to move the needle.
I just really quickly wanted to say, I think a perfect example, like just tying what Trevor said and what Troy just said together. So Trevor mentioned that the NFL commissioner, whatever his name is, I'm sorry, had said, I wish we listened and I wish we did this and all these things that he can now not take back. But like what actually happened after he said that? Oh, I wish we listened, but we didn't. Colin Kaepernick still has no job. Colin Kaepernick is still not on the team. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there was any direct apology to Colin Kaepernick at all. I could be wrong. I don't watch ESPN like that. But I think I'm right. So that's the difference between I am the commissioner of this giant organization. I have to save face so I do not lose this fan base, and action. So
my question is, when certain situations happen, like have to answer questions, and this should be open-ended question. Like, why do, like, so for Colin Kaepernick, for example, he had to explain himself for taking a knee. So why can't people have to do this, the opposite? I mean, that's an open-ended question, because if you want to talk about certain things, like for that example, Black Lives Matter, why can't you be Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter? It's totally possible. So I'm a black man, I'm a cop. What, I can't do both? So I think people have to realize that. So I think that's just my throwing it out there. Why can't you do that? I think people are so caught up in the political Black Lives Matter as that. But you can take that Black Lives Matter and mean totally different things from what they're doing. I don't agree with everything they're doing. Same time being a Republican and Democrat, you don't always agree with everything they're doing, but you vote for one. So like, I think you just have to understand that. Like, there's fine lines of different things you might take away from that. So I feel like it might go back to it, like with Colin Kaepernick, he had to explain himself. Why shouldn't some of the other people have to explain themselves for not doing or not kneeling or kneeling? I think either or. My example from MLL, I didn't take a knee. The reason I didn't take a knee because I didn't want people to think that I was doing something else and pull away from the issue. So I knew the minute I took a knee, people would say, "Hey, you're being a distraction." So I made it known that I wasn't taking a knee, but I was staying away from my team. So immediately they wouldn't associate with that with, "Oh, you're disrespecting the flag. Now what?" Like, then you still ask me the question of why are you doing this? Then I can speak about Black Lives Matter and what my experience is. So I think that goes both ways.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to, honestly, my initial statement, right? We've got to be curious. And curiosity, nobody loves confrontation. I mean, we all know somebody who does, but most people don't love confrontation. And, it's the most non-confrontational way to have a discussion. Hey, I'm curious about this, or I noticed this, or you know what, I just don't understand this. Can you help me to understand it? It's in any line of life. I mean, I ask my children those questions now. I didn't, probably didn't 15 years ago when it was more important to ask them the questions, but, I do, like, why, I would assume they were doing something. Now I'll say, well, tell me why you did that. And it makes a lot more sense a lot of times than I would have just thought it would have. So, I think as a leader, in having these conversations, getting people to be curious and ask, right? I think it takes the assuming in one perspective, out of it. And I think it's easy to ask questions, particularly in a non-confrontational way when you're curious. You're not making any judgments, simply, hey, can you explain to me why? Or tell me a little bit more about why you feel this way, or tell me a little bit more about this. And then at least you have the opportunity to start a conversation and make informed decisions and have some perspective that's not just yours. And again, I believe that's the way to create empathy.
Arielle, I want to jump in here. I know you're about to say something, but a couple of points. You guys have all brought some good points. I think one of the main things I do, and personally with just my friends, and I'll try to keep it to a locker room kind of theory, because this is a good way we're expressing this, like a locker room. Someone said in an earlier show, it's a human rights issue. 3 words are a human rights issue. Black Lives Matter. And that really sunk in for me because initially I did not, to my detriment, did not go and research the organization. I allowed myself, to Trevor's point, to be influenced by what I saw being presented to me without finding the facts. Once I read more and asked people that were very knowledgeable, a couple of history professors I know, one being Dr. Opie, and I understood the organization. And to, I think it was Mark's point, I think the organization is fantastic to a point, but I didn't leave the Black Lives Matter thing, those 3 words, and that's what I've been telling friends. I just had this conversation yesterday. It's 3 words, and this is a white person. I said, if you can't honestly say Black Lives Matter to yourself, then how are you going to be a part of affecting change? And I think to Troy's point, he said he saw the yard sign, to Mark and Arielle's point, to Coach Tiffany's point, let's all recognize the human rights issue first and just say, yes, I believe, and what I do is I add 2 words. I believe Black Lives Matter. Okay. Trevor, I want you to explain, you had mentioned a concept of the what about me? I think it's what about meism or something you mentioned a couple of shows.
Whataboutism?
whataboutism. Okay, it is that. I thought I was saying it wrong. When I'm done, I want to ask you to just explain that, because I think that is critical to a lot of what people have been saying here, especially about your personal as a leader, getting your message out. It can fall into this whataboutism pretty quickly. And I think it's an interesting thing and that I picked up from you a couple of shows ago, Trevor. And it really does apply to a lot of stuff in life when you start listening to people. And it kind of, I hate you for that, because I talk to friends and I'm like, oh, here we go, another one about me. You know?
Yeah.
But if you could take a minute to explain that and give an example, and I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and Arielle, I just wanted to clarify one quick thing. Is I was bringing up Goodell as like lowest common denominator of what he was doing. It's like, how could you not do this at the very beginning? Like, this is crazy that it took 5 years for this to happen. So I didn't mean to hold him up as some beacon of light there.
I didn't think you were.
Okay. So whataboutism, it brings up a point that I wanted to raise today, and it goes to some of the things that people have been bringing up, is to take a step back to COVID point that Troy was making before. I've been so shocked that I thought when COVID first started coming around, I was like, finally, something that can't get politicized. I was like, this is a disease that's going to impact us all. We're going to come together like some 9/11 around our country. And man, do I feel stupid for thinking that way, because it's like everything about it has been politicized. And that's really got to open our eyes to what the media is doing to us, what our politicians are doing to us. I really believe that our media and politicians keep us divided by keeping us mad at each other and not seeing all of them as being corrupt, crony, every single one of them. And they keep us distracted with these fights of our own while they kind of plunder the sellers, you know. And all of us stay alleged to our right or left parties and how we associate with ourselves. And so, you know, I talked about in the last show, Matt, like we've really got to get out of, and I see this with a lot of athletes, and I think our job as coaches and as mentors like Coach Stagnetta is with leadership. I really believe one of our jobs in sports, especially at the college and pro level, as these guys and women are becoming adults, is get them out of this mentality that they have to fall into some group. Get them to start to become principled, mission-driven people that can go out into the world and have some set of values. And it doesn't mean they can't be good team members. It doesn't mean they can't buy into a group mission, and it doesn't mean they can't listen. I love watching Coach Stagnetta coach in the PLL because he gets a bunch of grown men to listen to him, which is a minor miracle when you watch the other sidelines, you know? And so we really have to get these guys to stop being like, well, my friend said this and my mentor said this. It's like, grow up, you know, like you're a grown man, and stop worrying about what people are going to think about you. This isn't middle school. You're not an adolescent. And be willing to step out of the box a little bit. And I think, you know, to Mark's point before, it's like our lacrosse world, we're so damn conservative and straight-laced. It's like every recruiting, and I'm not saying I lose any privileges in the lacrosse world because of it, but every recruiting event I go to, I have coaches, oh, your hair's long, you're really growing out that beard. It's like, guys, get over yourselves, you know, like this is who I am. My wife likes it, you know, I'm still the same person. And so I just think as a lacrosse world, we've got to evolve a little bit and becoming more accepting of differences and accepting of different cultures. The whataboutism becomes, so I come back to your question, sorry for the long-winded answer, but what is it aboutism comes into play because it's a control device of politicians and of media, that as soon as you say something, as soon as you say Black Lives Matter, they say, well, what about this one division of Black Lives Matter in Seattle that raided and looted all these stores? And it's like it completely takes you away from the main message. And that's the issue right there. It's like you have I wear a St. Christopher's medal. If someone asked me every time, well, what about Jerry Falwell? And I had to explain Jerry Falwell and his actions, it would be like a really long day for me. So how come as like a white man, or how come Christians don't have to explain every little group? There's always going to be bad apples or bad actors in every group. How come we don't have to explain that? Where if we bring up Black Lives Matter, there has to be a reason given for all of that. So that's where I think whataboutism ties in all these things that we're talking about today. Sorry for the long-winded response.
No, go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to say, I appreciate that. I mean, I think the point about politicizing this issue is the real disappointing component of it. And as Trevor was saying, that's exactly what's happened. And the lacrosse community may be better, maybe worse than the general public. I don't know. I think it's just as bad. It may be worse in terms of, that view. A couple of years ago, I don't know if some of you remember, our communications team did a cover story about what it's like to be Black in lacrosse, and had a number of vignettes in there from players in their own words talking about their experiences. And, publicize the anonymous letters and communications you receive from people in the game who are saying just that. Stop politicizing, my son, my daughter, I don't want to read about some political issue. Can't the sport be free of this, right? Which is preposterous. And it goes back, I think, to the point about, who is the most influential person in a young lacrosse player's life? The coach, I would say. The coach has incredible power to influence. There are some outstanding coaches out there, certainly at the upper levels of the game. But I think part of our significant challenge in trying to shift culture and the appropriate focus of leaders, because I would say that, Coach Tiffany is an incredible leader. There are others in this group. Everybody here is an incredible leader in one way or another. But it all starts when a child first is exposed to the game. And it all starts when you are somehow fall in love with the game, not just because of the game, but I think the adult who's influencing you from the very beginning. And the question is that I've continued to ask and is how can we, if coaches are indeed teachers and coaches are the critical integer in retention of players as they go through, then how are we going to address the issue of coaches becoming smarter about this issue, investing time in this issue at the youngest age levels, where kids are most impressionable in terms of, are they feeling welcomed, belonged? Is it an innate part of the culture of a 10-year-old team, of a 12-year-old team? Trevor does this from all I've heard and read, and others do, but most do not. How do we, as a sport, require youth coaches to embrace this incredible responsibility of player experience, player retention, and specific to this conversation, the fact that Black Lives Matter and the fact that they are the culture keepers of the game on this particular issue, among others. How do we influence youth coaches, youth organizations, whatever it may be, to require some sort of element of education and or commitment to this responsibility as such an essential component of the lacrosse experience?
Steve, here's a question for you. Can y'all hear me? I changed to the earpiece. Matt, is the voice better? Okay. So I love what you said, but you want to also remember there's a balance between freedom and there's, you got requirements on this side, you got freedom, but I do say there's a responsibility element, right? So it's just like level 1 training and all the different things when you look at coaches training, and it's just like as an educator, right? There's certain, it's like when you learn education law, right? I just finished a master's degree and you had to go through this whole education law piece. And part of it was not for us to become lawyers, but for us to be aware of how this thing works, right? And so I do think that it's part of the education process for people to move forward as coaches is to understand players, right? We all talk about the game and drills, and you go to a coaches convention and the difference between good and great coaches. It's the ones that not only know the game with the level of expertise, but know players with that same level of expertise, and how to make those connections for them to be, you know, the best version of themselves, right? Because if you have that tension, then they're obviously not going to be able to peak, to maximize their potential. So the question is, how do you infuse more of that at the lower level so that people can be responsible, you know, responsive and responsible when it comes to coaching our youth players, and even high school players and whatever. So it's not, you have to have this curriculum in your coaching strategies, right? But it's more, if you're going to be a certified or whatever coach, then you need to have had some level of experience that at least gives you some level of a knowledge so that you can be more responsible on how you react and how you orchestrate the experience.
I'll ask this question, and I'm directing it towards Samantha a little bit. I know just a little bit about their school, their team. You know, in a leadership role, when you have, I don't want to, but when you have an option, when you're building your roster, if you have that option through your recruiting process, let's just say that's how you build your future rosters. Hartford's got an interesting story, and that's what kind of cued me into the school. The roster is has black, brown, yellow, every color on it, and I think it's and I've heard from Coach Decker, the head coach, how she saw it as being beneficial. And Samantha, if you can touch on that, it'd be kind of neat to hear how you guys built that and how you progress with that.
Yeah,
no
absolutely.
pressure, no pressure from Arielle. I'm just going to mute her.
Well, something that I found really interesting is that everyone here's talked about how everyone has a leadership opportunity and a role. And something that I think is really important is for everyone to kind of realize their impact. And we all grew up differently. We all are in different levels of coaching, whether player, coach, owner. And we all have this opportunity to make an impact greater than ourselves and the group that we're directly correlated with. It can be bigger than you. And something that drew me to want to be a coach at the University of Hartford was meeting Coach Decker and Coach T. And they took this opportunity to be like, I want my team to reflect what the world looks like. Our world is not all one color, not all one person. And if we're going to keep having these teams, that college is a fundamental part of your life. It's where you grow into being a kid to an adult. And if we're not surrounding our players and these athletes with what the world shows, how are they ever going to learn how to navigate those opportunities and how to have those conversations? So something that Coach Decker has always done is when we go to recruit, we look at everyone and we're like, hey, what can we do as a coach? Who can we develop? You don't have to be the best one in that moment. We take it as we have pride in our coaching staff and our ability to be like, we can morph anyone into a lacrosse player if they have the fundamental basics of athleticism, speed, hard work. And we take lacrosse and use that as a tool to give them more opportunity.
I was on mute, sorry. Yeah, that's an interesting point. And Steve, you mentioned leadership. You know, a lot of the conversations, excuse me, have stemmed around having a grasp of the history of the sport. Because if you truly grasp the history of the sport, you understand that it's not a Northeast white boy prep school sport, is the whole, you know, that whole saying, or girl, boy or girl sport. You know, for me personally, and I've said this before, when I learned the history in 7th grade, it like clicked for me. I said, man, American, okay, cool. Well, I'm a brown person and they're closer to me than my white friends. And that's, you know, no offense to anybody, but that's what, as a 7th grader, that's what you think. You don't really think too deep. So I thought this was a natural fit for me. I don't know how others, you know, approached it, but I do know that the leader at that time, it was merely my oldest brother's friend who came back from college that was taking a semester off. It was our youth coach. But he taught us, this, in his funny way, I'll say, the history of the game. And then, you know, later on you look it up and you really realize all the true aspects. But the history of the game, I think, is vitally important at that younger level for those kids. And not only at once a year, but, you know, through a program, maybe every year, they're going back and learning the historical value of the game. So when they do get older, maybe that helps. And I'm just saying, maybe that helps them not approach a player of color when they see them as so different. They're just another player. Arielle, I know, okay, but I'm going to steal your thunder because I think you were the one that said earlier, you said, why would I be called, why am I the black girl on that team and not number 2 or number 4 or whatever? And how many of you have heard that? That's a big slight. You know, you don't say, oh, that black player, that black midi. Why aren't they just a number just like everybody else? So I'll shut up now and let you.
So I actually, like, as everyone was speaking, I was kind of thinking on how I would answer the question, like, what can we do? Because to be perfectly honest, at that young level, you know, I could walk up to the PAL down the street right now and volunteer to be a youth coach, and there would be like, okay, here's a whistle, but like there's no like to make sure like what kind of person I am and what my agenda is. Because it's, you know, when you're a coach, especially of such young, like you said, impressionable minds, you're more than just grooming lacrosse players. You're like grooming young women, young men. And so I was thinking as everybody was talking, and Matt just brought up, you know, the history is actually very vital. And the thing about lacrosse now, and the image lacrosse has now, is like we talked about, this elitist white sport that I don't belong in, or someone who looks like me, they look at this sport and they're just like, well, I clearly don't belong here. And that's why when I started playing lacrosse, and all my friends was like, that is a white sport. What are you doing playing that sport? So actually, now that you mention it, you know, I feel like, well, the problem, I don't want to say problem, but one of the issues with the culture of lacrosse is the entitlement that white players have that makes them feel like this is theirs. Because it's you know, they took this, like, you know, from the indigenous people, like, this is their sport, like, to where now we would look at a team with an indigenous person on it and look at them as the anomaly when it, like, this is their culture. So that's one of the deeper rooted issues with why we have this stigma that this is a white sport and that people of color do not belong in this space, is because of how white players have grown to make it something else. And like I said, just the general entitlement that comes with, you know, I think it all just is tied into the privilege. Like, you have the privilege of doing that and feeling like this is yours and you can call this yours because your brother played it and your dad played it and he played it in college, and, you know, it's in your community, and, you know, but I think that's actually a really interesting way that maybe moving forward we could go about things. If kids knew from such a young age that we got this sport from brown people, I don't think brown people would feel so, you know, alienized trying to play it. And then I think that it would change a lot, actually. So thanks for mentioning that. It sparked a little light bulb.
So Samantha, you said something really great. So here we are, I'm representing Nation United, right? Which is we deliberately try to find, you know, probably the most diverse kids socioeconomically, even from states like that kids might be underrepresented in the game. And so if you look at our roster, you know, it's not all black kids, but we try to make sure that we deliberately try to find kids of color to be on the team, because we know how rare that is. But the interesting thing is attack, for example. You can look far and wide. It is so hard for us to find attack because all the kids get midfield defense. Goalies and attack, when it comes to diversity, not going to find many. You don't even find that many face-off guys. So it's interesting because the pipeline, so all these kids are coming in, but they get funneled down to the same positions. But the interesting thing is, just like you said, Samantha, you know, as a college coach, obviously you need enough talent to win the kind of games you need to win if you want to be competitive, but you need great work ethic and all those other things. I talked to a coach the other night. It was so awesome to hear that he says, I don't even want you to talk to me about how strong the player is. I want to know how strong the person is. because I can do some things. He said, I've coached at a level and we beaten a lot of teams, and people were wondering how. Yeah, we had one kid that was better than probably anybody on the field in some cases, but the rest of them were not highly recruited athletes, but they had the mental right? So at Nation United, I'm sharing this with you because as we look at our formula for our roster, we need to win because we need to be able to, you can't just be a bunch of athletes running around on the field because that's the stereotype. You know, you got all these athletic kids. I get tired of hearing people just say athlete all the time. So we also have to say, if we want to have some attack play position and have some kids of color, we also may need to take kids, and we don't have the time to develop them like a traditional club team, right? We have these kids at tournaments. So now we having to change out how we do things so we can train them a little bit, because a lot of those kids are either getting pushed to the midfield or they're not being invested in as attack, for example. And so it's interesting that you said, Samantha, about some of the players that you're deliberately trying to find kids that represent what the world looks like, but we're also trying to find kids that are diverse, but we also have this other thing that says we got to compete, because if you just go for whatever all the time, then we're just being what everybody thought we'd be. So we got this pressure to do this, but we also have this mission to do this other thing. So we have really difficult conversations within our organization to make sure that we have to develop a few players. Because the truth is, coaches, I mean, you look at the number of Division I, Division III, Division II teams out there, there are not enough kids to kind of go, everybody wants the same kids. But then there's the other kid that's right below that kid that hadn't had the access that the one had. And with the right, you know, the question is, are you trying to develop players too, or it's a win now? Now, it depends on your program and what your AD is saying and the rest. But I love hearing what Samantha said, because even at Nation United, where we're trying to win now too, but we realize the bigger picture when you zoom out is we have to try to continue to find players who are right there on the bubble, because that's why we exist as well.
Like the biggest thing for me is, like, when you say you want to grow the sport, it's one thing to grow the sport from Long Island to California to Texas, but is the sport growing within different communities, people, brown people, Asian descent. That's for me, that's growing the game, because when you get those avenues, different culture comes into the game and different growth comes into the game. A prime example is I've been in Garden City my whole life pretty much, and I've been the black kid on every single team by myself for everything I played on. My first time I played with another black player was in prep school. And for me, it was really unique because I never had that experience before. I never had experience to talk about certain things with another player that found a common denominator. So for me, when you understand that, how much that is huge for an individual at a team aspect, someone to go to, it's a big thing. When I got to college, I got my master's program with Coach Tierney at Hofstra. The first thing he did, without an answer, got me in touch with Kyle Harrison and Joe Von Miller. Used to make you feel like, hey, I might not have all the answers, but these guys may help you with some things I can't help you with. By having that outreach and understanding that you might not know everything, a coach can open up doors and make it seem, or not make it seem, but he knows he cares about you. But it's about something that little. If we want to grow the game in different environments and different cultures, we must go away from the things that we find usual or find we're comfortable with. I think some of these things that we keep doing, we're bringing the same crowd. You want to grow the game and get those avenues and bring brown and tan people into the game, we must go to people that we don't know necessarily. Maybe, hey, my name is so-and-so. I heard you have a team. I just want to observe. And from that small detail, you might have a kid 5 years, 10 years later say, hey, that's a guy who showed up to my camp and I want to come here. But I feel like right now we're so kind of what Trevor was saying, we're so tight-knit, like keep it in-house, like, but you want to grow the sport. If you really, really mean that, you must do things that don't make you feel uncomfortable, because sometimes you want to grow the sport and people don't look like you. So I think we start there.
Well, busting some of how many times have we heard, some of us, that historically, lacrosse is a great fraternity. It's a really close-knit, tight-knit group that really cares, and it's small enough, and we all get, and that is really the essence of the issue we're fighting, is that, for years, and I'm old enough now to have known a lot of people over the years and seen a lot of interesting things over the years from people. But for years, the sport absolutely was promoted as this close-knit, tight, small, passionate group of people. And you look back on that now and you realize, yeah, and that's why it's so exclusive. And so I think clearly we've got to overcome that issue, because the phrase lacrosse is a credible fraternity, sorority, whatever the the name is, that is part of perpetuating the exclusivity of the sport. And I think, you know, we got a lot of people in the sport who I think are still living that kind of, that culture. You know, again, you know, I appreciate, Mark, your point there. You know, investing more time and effort into, I mean, from Trevor's standpoint, yes, we've got to, you know, look at best practice examples of existing programs that are doing it well and should be scaled. I mean, experiment with those programs. The other side of the coin, Mark, your point is we got to go to different corners of the country and partner with Parks and Rec, or partner with YMCA, or partner with PAL, or partner with organizations that are more focused on making the sport more accessible. But just getting back to, there's still cultural norms in our game. Obviously, it's a master of the obvious statement, that are reinforcing the exclusivity of the sport. And, you know, one question is, how directly do we call them out as people, as institutions moving forward? Certainly my organization is not perfect and has been called out appropriately, but how do, in terms of really trying to disrupt this culture of fraternity, tight-knit, close-knit, and seeing, it's one thing to see kind of clear examples of racism on the field when a player says something to another player, right? That's obvious. But some of the perpetuation of the old boy network, how do we bust that relative to race?
Yeah, Arielle, I love the points you bring up about the entitlement of our game, because I see it all the time now in parents and players. And I think one of the answers perhaps to your question, Steve, is how do we keep educating people on the history of the game, respecting where it came from, the people that have been involved. You know, for those of you that don't know me, I was born with a stick in my hand. My father, Bill Tierney, has been coaching the game my entire life. And so I've gotten to be around tons of lacrosse people growing up. And I think that's why Coach Tiffany has such a great approach to the game with his players, is because his first experience of the game was witnessing it from American Indians, and bringing that love of the game and that respect for the game to his players. But these kids and these families start the game and they act like they own it. And I think a lot of people are like that in the game. I see a lot of that out in Colorado, where, you know, coaches have been around and they think they're the king of their domain, and no one else can be involved. And we have to start to respect the lineage of the game, respect the people that have played it and coached it before us. I've known Coach Stagnetta my entire life, always respected the way he coached his teams, learned. He probably was coaching me out at camps when I was 6 years old. And I think the more history that everyone has around the game, and the more respect they have for the people that came before them, the more we're going to want to share this game with others, and the more we're going to appreciate the culture of our game to share with others.
So if I can, if you don't mind, I love that, right? There is, I grew up in East Syracuse, which was not, you know, it was a very blue collar. Lars can comment on that. Very blue collar, tough. We grew up playing on, you know, played club on the reservation, you know, traveling back and forth, playing summer league. You know, I think some of us who have been around this, and Steve and, you know, Lars growing up in Lafayette, we do have some perspective. And, you know, it's important. And I tried, you know, this is spending 3 weeks with Zed Williams was one of the most refreshing experiences, and one of the most enjoyable experiences I have had as a coach in a long, long time. And I've coached Native Americans. I've had, you know, I was at W&L for 12 years. Lars actually was his first coaching job, was my assistant. And it's not an easy place to be and be a black or brown student. And I fought a number of wars for guys, you know, during that. I learned at a young age of 25, when I was the head coach there. So, you know, what I tried to do was share what my experience with Zed was like, and what a respect he had for the game and for his stick in the story. I mean, it just brought me back to, you know, to being young in Syracuse again. What an amazing experience to be around someone who truly enjoyed the game like that. And he had an impact. He had an impact on a lot of people, you know, black, white, brown. People saw him and they're like, wow, this is what a great story. What a great opportunity. What a humble guy. And, you know, those are the kind of things when you talk about the history. You know, I do believe that some of us need to use our experience in this, because I don't think everybody who's been around this game forever has that one perspective. I think a lot of us actually is in, you know, I think, Arielle, you said this, where you came from and where you grew up does build a foundation of how you think and how you approach this. And unfortunately, sometimes how we grew up and the sports that we played and having coached, you know, different kids from different backgrounds, sometimes we take for granted because we're comfortable and we've been, you know, we fought in our ways for those people. Sometimes we become complacent because we don't realize necessarily, you know, that everybody doesn't look at it the way we do. And, you know, I wish I could say it was as deliberate as I can now, but sharing Zed's story was, it was, again, one of the most enjoyable and I think impactful things that, you know, that I've been able to do as a professional coach, because people, you know, he was trending number 5 on Twitter and he has no social media. Like, that's the kind of impact someone like that had on lacrosse people. You know, so, you know, I think that those type of, you know, in Mark, in what you guys are, what you're accomplishing and the experiences you have, I think as coaches, we have to, you know, we have to share those stories and trumpet those stories, because I think that does, you know, that is going to impact young kids out there in their, you know, and how they look at this and in how they, you know, in the opportunities that it produces. So, you know, growing up near the res and knowing those guys and playing with Tarbells and Solomons and people that Lars looked up to when he was a kid, you know, gives me a real appreciation, you know, for what Zed was, right? Yeah, I haven't seen that in a long time. It was amazing. I can't speak enough to, you know, to what it was like working with him. And he's a huge role model to anyone who's willing to listen. And it's kind of my responsibility to share that story. And, you know, Lars knows it because he's had the opportunity to spend more time with that young man than I did. So.
Yeah, I'd love to chime in. I completely agree, as Jim was backing up Trevor. Just how do we advance this is in understanding where we came from, the history of the game, and celebrating those. First of all, if any of you ever heard that Jim made me cry while I was assistant coach, that's a lie. I wanted to spell that right now. I never cried in Lexington, Virginia while I was working.
Thank you.
It's interesting, you know, Troy, listening as you try to assemble the roster for Nations United, you know, because you're struggling with the highly skilled positions. And it has nothing to do with the athletes and their race. It's just how much experience they've had. I mean, we witness that ourselves as we try to put together our rosters. We tend not to go to Texas looking for attackmen. You know, we do have a goalie hopefully coming to UVA from the state of Texas in a couple of years, but you tend to think about, you go to the, you know, the quote financial term, emerging markets, you know, the areas that are newer to the game, you tend to go find middies and defensemen. And so so you're facing that same thing. It's interesting. I remember, you know, on the reservations now, they're looking for goalies, you know, everyone's you know, and defensemen, because everyone wants to be a box lacrosse player, you know, so that's just a function of the reality of what's the most popular game on the reserves is the indoor game. And so it's you know, understanding, you know, the tells there. And so I bring up something, and I'll just think about this out loud and say it out loud, as a Virginia coach who's has a history with the Native Americans and and learned the game from the Onondaga people, to now sitting in a seat where, okay, I'm a trigger puller, right? I get to make decisions. My assistant coaches might say, hey, we like these guys. I'm like, I get to make the final say. So I'm a trigger puller. Whenever you're trying to make change, you try to get to who can actually make the change, whenever you're trying to get something done on this planet, who can get somebody hired, as opposed to going to the HR person who's just going to follow the rope, the logistical protocol. And I'm like, okay, we need to make our team at UVA more diverse, so let's go do that. And yet it's interesting, especially this summer with COVID-19, what am I exposed to? I'm getting fantastic films. We can't go live scout because of the dead period for all NCAA sports. And what's being exposed to me are these elite club teams who can pass on the expenses to their families to create this film that's free to us coaches, 450 different Division 1, 2, and 3 college programs. We have incredible access, incredible libraries, but we're missing a lot of players right now, aren't we? We're just seeing the traveling club teams because obviously the high school seasons didn't happen. So we didn't even get a chance to see highlight films if a young man or woman, if depending on women's coach, could assemble. And so unfortunately, this is exaggerating, what the sport it looks like already. And so it's something that we're trying to make a difference. And, but as we all know, in the end, we got to win. And so we're trying to find those best players. But sometimes it's that search, the quest, and it's certainly being made more difficult this summer.
Coach, but isn't that something? Arielle, I promise you, I'm gonna do it in a minute.
It's okay.
59 seconds. I promise you. So I was thinking about this. So you have, even with a business, right? You have talent acquisition, you have talent development, and you have talent engagement, right? And the engagement part is why they stay in your program. Development, obviously, that piece, and then the acquisition piece, and it is pipeline related, right? Because at the end of the day, you have a certain school that they have to have certain academic criteria to get into the school. So even if you found these great players, depending on where they go to school, and a lot of that has, when I'm out there, even with Nation United, it's either upper middle class, Black families, Black and brown families, or you have the kid that happens to go to prep school who was maybe received some financial aid or whatever, and is receiving funding on that club team. But rarely do you find the ones that are in the public school. For example, if you're upstate New York and maybe, or in Garden City or somewhere like that, you might find it. But it is really interesting that it's the private school kids or the club kids. And again, somebody's either helping them with some kind of funding or they have the funding themselves. So there's a big gap because I know, when I was at Macaulay, the good news was I was at a prep school, right? So we developed a lot of players and had a lot of kids that played football and basketball who ended up playing lacrosse because they saw a coach that says he's going to be fair if I'm on his team. I mean, they don't know if I was going to be fair or not, but it wasn't going to be because of the color of their skin. It might have been something else, right? But I will say that you're exactly right. The gap is just going to get wider right now. But just like anything else, folks, we all riding on a bus that has a racism in the fuel tanks, right? We going. It takes effort. It takes equal pressure or friction. Just like when you're playing defense, it's like equal pressure, right? You got to put equal pressure when it comes to the slowing this thing down and changing the direction. It doesn't happen just by sitting and riding a little bit farther. It takes equal pressure. So if it's systemic on this side, it needs to be systemic on this side. And that's why we're so fortunate to have you guys in leadership roles here, because your voice is a lot louder than a lot of people's voices. It's just a fact. And being courageous is part of the job description when it comes to being a leader. That's just how it is. Empathetic, but also have courage. So again, having y'all on this show, for me, I'm just honored to be on here with y'all because I'm just a guy with a Nation t-shirt on. That's all.
I gotta let Arielle go because she has to work. And I promised her I'd let her speak before she pops off to work, but we'll keep going. So go ahead, Arielle.
Yeah, very disappointed that I have to sign off. But like the last couple of comments, just, as they were going off, just thoughts. And I think just tying all of my thoughts together, like things that everybody said, when Mark was talking earlier about opening doors for your players of color, because it's important to acknowledge that there are just some things you're not going to understand or things that you're not going to be able to do as a non-person of color. So stories and just the accessibility to things like that and people like that are very important. And, you know, then we shifted to talking about like the tight knit, you know, what we've known the lacrosse community to be talked about as. And, you know, we think of it as this small community because it's not this worldwide sport just yet. But if you think about how quote unquote small that community is, think about like the Black lacrosse community, how small that is within the already small community. Like just because you brought it up, the issue about the faces and voices of Black lacrosse, that was the issue of US lacrosse that I was in. So I very clearly remember like the following issue and the responses that were from the parents and the players that were like, we don't want to talk about this, and why does it have to be about race? And I remember reading it like laughing, like, because how can it is exactly about race, but that is the luxury that you have, that you can decide when you want to turn the race conversation off. I can never stop talking about this because I'm Black when I walk in the room. So it's a constant thing, and we can't let things like that derail the conversation. Like that representation was so, just being featured in it was important for me. And then I didn't even realize how important it was going to be for other people. I had girls like find my social media and thank me for what did I do? Like I spoke my truth. And, you know, to think that like I was representation enough for them to continue to want to play a sport. And it's little things like that that can change. You know, we talked about the retention rate. You know, hearing and seeing more Black players definitely factored into my decision to continue playing. Like when I was younger, I didn't know any, disregarding the fact that I barely knew about lacrosse, like when I was very young, but I didn't know any Black lacrosse players until I really started getting serious about it. I was like 13 or 14. And it was literally only because, just funny enough, Dominique Alexander, like in the, I don't remember what team he plays for, but he's from my town and he used to train with my club track team. Like I knew him as a person, and I didn't even know he played lacrosse when he was there with us. And the only reason I remember is because my track coach used to always be to him like, why are you playing this white sport and you could go run track in college? And I don't think that blows anyone's mind. Like we've seen college track, but you know, that was something I dealt with too. Why am I playing this when I could run track in college? You know, that seems to be what people who look like me do, and I already do it. But just becoming aware of like that this is a real possibility, and that this was actually something that with the time and the effort and the work, I could reach this goal sometime, was something that really continued to push me forward. So representation, I think, is just a huge thing, and it gets downplayed because some people don't think it is as effective as it is. Like it's really a big deal. Like for a young Black player to meet someone like Mark, or I've coached little girls and they meet someone like me and they're really just like blown away that I play lacrosse in college, or, you know, that I'm even from where they're from. So representation and things like that are very important. And like, I believe it was Lars who mentioned it, the intentional recruiting is something that I also feel very strongly about, because like he said, colleges are missing out on a lot of talent because they are not looking in the right places. And but when there are eligible candidates that are maybe in the right place, right time, they're being overlooked because they're not what lacrosse players look like. So representation matters, being intentional about all your actions matter, and just gotta really unlearn some bad habits. I think that's where it starts. It's not like we can't just automatically be like, this is what we're gonna do that's new. We need to be like, we're going to very very intentionally stop doing this. But yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I love hearing what you all have to say. It's really been a pleasure. I'm sorry I have to dash off.
Working girl, working girl. It's all right. I'll make sure you have everyone's contact information like we always do. If you want to swap notes. Thanks for being on, Arielle. I appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Well done.
Thank you.
We will keep going. We got like just a couple more minutes, and
Man, I'll mute in the background. I gotta start cooking.
I knew you had something with the kids. I just wanted, because I wanted to make sure I said this or mentioned this question or topic of discussion. We did talk about locker room, and this is a safe place for everyone. But I think this one: how do you meet expectations of supporting the Black or Brown community and maintain your personal level of comfort and authenticity? We touched on that a little bit, and I just want to circle back to that. I think one of you had said, or a couple of you stated something about just saying Black Lives Matter. Coach Tiffany and Arielle said that, and Mark said they were so proud that they heard that. I think really, I believe Black Lives Matter. If you're afraid of 3 words, say 5. But just starting there for your own personal good, I think is a great way to go and take it from there, because then you're truly telling someone that's of color that they matter. And that's what Troy was saying. He's walking through his neighborhood. It's nice to see a sign. I have him next to me in the complex next to me. I don't know who hung it up, but I think it's nice that someone recognizes it's just the human rights aspect. It's not political. It's not, I'm telling you to go do something bad. It's basic human rights. I value you as a person, and I would like you to value me as a person, and so I take us there, and I ask, I'll go around and let you guys all say kind of a closing statement, if you will, and speak as long as you feel like you need to. I always make Troy go last, but I'm going to let him go first, and I'm going to let Trevor, I'm giving you the warning, you're going to go last. No pressure, but
I know what you're doing, man. All right, you try to abbreviate me, man. I got you. All right, man. You gotta censor me right now.
I know.
We're gonna
come back to you. We're gonna come back to you either way.
I'm watching Coach Tiffany's cooking show, man. I know the guy can chef it up on the field. I'm watching him chef it up in the kitchen right now.
I'm curious.
Oh,
what is
all right. I see.
Is that a wok? Is he? Oh.
That's a wok, man. He's ready.
Just remember, Troy, there's no meat to be found in his kitchen. So
hey, man,
you have to get your protein a different way.
That man's gonna live forever. He's gonna live forever. That's all I'm saying. So I'll just say this. Here's another. So pertaining to Black Lives Matter. So it's like anything else. If we don't get involved, that means a nation, right? If my white neighbors, for example, don't get involved and don't push signs and don't say certain things, a bunch of Black people saying Black Lives Matter, of course we'd be saying it. We're saying it, it's a preaching to the choir. It's like the civil rights movement until other folks got involved, and freedom riders and all those other folks got involved that were different, right? They were Black, white, whatever. Until you have people that are in a position of power and influence involved in the conversation, it doesn't go anywhere. And so that's one of the reasons why, just like with organizations, when you have an organization that is minority owned, women or people of color, they tend to have more people in their organization, employees. Why? Because their pipeline is different. And so for me, I was at Macaulay. I had 12 Black players walking on the field. I had kids from Pakistan, kids from whatever. Part of it was just the identity. They also knew that they was attracted because they attracted each other, but also the leadership, the power reflected diversity. So you don't have to look like me to attract players that look like me, for example. You just have to make sure that those players see the signal. They know that it's safe. So for example, with a coach like Coach Tiffany saying Black Lives Matter, I will guarantee you there's some players who might have been looking this way, maybe looking that way now just because they're going, hey, doesn't mean that other coaches don't believe it, but it just means that Coach Tiffany, if you say it, you got to own it in a different way, especially if you're at that level. So for me personally, I'm again thankful that people have the courage to take a risk, right? You don't know if it's going to work out for you, but you're really thinking about it's going to work out for the person that you're looking at, not the person in the mirror. It's the neighbor that you have and the friend and the players. So thank y'all for again, being a part of this conversation, because it doesn't work if only a subset of people are involved in it. It has to be people who are from different races and not just the people of color in the conversation, for sure.
I appreciate you, Troy. Coach Stagnetta, closing thoughts?
Yeah, you know, and I think Arielle hit on it, and it really, you know, kind of brings you to point. It's a process, right? We sometimes, you know, obviously, these are challenging times, and this has really come to light because of some unfortunate situations. But you know, when we just jump to the outcome without actually the process, you know, we're never going to, you know, it's never going to be sustainable. So I believe that there has to be a process, and in some cases, you know, people will move slower than others, but they will be making progress and moving in the right direction. You know, if you skip the process and you just jump to the outcome, again, no sustainability. So, you know, at the education piece of it is very important. I still think the curiosity piece of asking questions and learning and doing, you know, I think there's a lot of uninformed opinions out there. I think, Troy, you know, you pointed that out with with the news and COVID and, you know, and everything else. And, you know, people have to do their due diligence. And, you know, people like Lars and myself who have experience and have seen this. Sometimes we don't have to take things, you know, sometimes, and I'm not speaking for Lars, but I know that sometimes I take things for granted, and, you know, unless it's in the forefront. And again, the beauty of what I do and how I get to do it now is I continue to learn and get better, you know, every day. And, you know, COVID and Black Lives Matter and the unfortunate events that have transpired have allowed me to continue to learn and focus on, you know, on some things that, you know, I kind of took for granted, you know, honestly.
Well said, Coach, well said. Samantha.
I think, well, one, I really am happy that I was able to hop on as a substitute for this conversation. I've learned a lot from everyone on this panel, and just what you guys do and what you represent is really awesome. And like I said, I'm just grateful that I was able to hear it first hand. Something that I think is really awesome is that it's all of our impact. We each have an impact in whatever community that we're in. And to really take a look at ourselves and be like, I'm going to be the person that steps up. I'm not looking for the person to the right of me to step up or the left. I'm looking at myself, and I'm willing to do what it takes to make that impact and that change. And I think if everyone on this screen does one thing, we can impact a great amount of people, and getting those to follow us. So that's what I got.
No, it's well said. Well said. Mr. Ellis.
Yeah, I think my closing thing is just kind of with the issue with race. I think you have to understand that this may sound as crazy as it is. People are debating the pigment of skin. People are leveled off by the pigment of skin. It is a crazy thing to think about. There's no physiological difference, but the skin difference. And I think people have to believe in that and really believe in that. I look at a person beyond the skin. And it's so simple, and we have so much trouble dealing with this as a country, as a nation. So I think for us as leaders, we have to be able to attack or approach this issue with an open mind and understand it's not about us. And I say that because eventually, like, my future kids, my future relatives will have the interaction with Caucasian men and women. And based off that experience, it should be a good one. It should be no connotations with a certain race because of social media. And I know this is a small group, but we affect a lot of people. We coach a lot of people. We are people empowered that can change in a little scale of things. I come from a place where I was the only Black kid on my team for most of my life. And what their experiences were when they saw a Black kid was me. So they know Mark. So I had to hold myself to a certain standard sometimes, or mostly all the time, because they may not interact with another Black kid until college. And same thing goes with lacrosse. For some summer camps, you may not see a Black lacrosse kid one camp, but you have to make sure as a Black person or a coach, you have to make sure you have that kid's back, or you represent yourself at a high standard, so you know that, so that kid knows you trust him, and that kid knows you trust you. So, and all be all, I think we should just open our minds and just keep pushing forward and do our best to make a change, and don't feel comfortable, because a lot of people aren't comfortable right now.
Well said, Mark. Well said. Oh, we're going to enter into Coach Tiffany's cooking show. Coach Tiffany, if you're there, there he is. Okay.
Hopefully I talk louder than the walk. This was a tremendous opportunity for me to learn. You know, first of all, I really loved Jim's point about just being curious and asking these questions, and and I saw someone else said, make yourself uncomfortable. And, you know, as I admitted, I've got White Fragility, the book on my bedstand right now, and it's not as easy to read as my other books, you know, because it really makes me self-examine. It really makes me have to think about something that it's just a lot easier not to think about, right? You know, like, oh, I'll just go about my life and my day. But if I'm going to be a better person and better coach and more curious, like Jim said, you know, I've got to learn these other perspectives so I can broaden and make it a better locker room. And like, I think someone else may create, you know, I think Troy, you said a sense of belonging, you know, that everyone feels a part of this team. Because one of the questions I had, I was, you know, there's some great questions here, is how do I make sure that the locker room is a safe space? Because so often, you know, we think of sport as the great integrator. You know, it just brings us together, you know, and, oh yeah, we don't have issues. You know, we in the locker room on our team, we're great. Well, the more I thought about that, is it great because the people of color or minorities in the locker room have just kept their mouths shut because they want to be accepted. They just want to play lacrosse or play whatever sport. So they'll sacrifice a little bit of integrity so they can be a part of the sport that allows them to express themselves as an athlete. And all the time, what are we doing as coaches? All the time we're like, you know, suck it up, play hurt, go get us that tough ground ball, make that tough play. And so we send that message so the athletes, you know, take that message in, right? All right, suck it up, okay? You know, so and then all of a sudden somebody makes this comment over here. Coach Tiffany didn't tell me to suck it up because of that comment about race, but I'll transfer that to the rest of this. And so all of a sudden the locker room, which I think is fine, isn't fine. So I think this has been great, and I've learned a lot from you guys, and I'm going to continue to try to keep learning.
Well, we very much appreciate you having on. If you need to sign off, go ahead. And thank you to your wife for allowing us to enter your kitchen. I got Steve Stenerson, you're next.
Yeah, I also appreciate the opportunity to be here and listen and share but learn. You know, I think like many of us on this call, all of us who are white, we're white men and women of privilege. And I know, I'm sure everybody else is, I know I have invested a lot of time in self-reflection over the last 6 months around this issue, both personally and professionally. And I think the key to sustained progress in this regard are the white men and women of privilege. We need to find our voices, which I'm trying to do personally and professionally. We need to invest in more conversation, more learning, more reading. And I think the key to that, you know, we talk about uncomfortable conversations. And I think the key to kind of releasing some of the discomfort, if you're, in my case, a white man of privilege, is humility. And to me, that's critical to, I don't know it all. I'll never be able to truly understand. Because I am a white man of privilege. However, if I'm humble enough to realize I don't know it all, and that I need to admit that and be vulnerable, then I think that's the key to greater understanding and can help unlock much more of a comfort in many of us white men and women of privilege to really turn the corner on this issue. Because as was said earlier, I don't know if Troy or Mark or somebody said, you know, well, of course, Black men and women of color are, you know, really behind this, but they need support, both institutional, from a policy standpoint, and just other humans who are white standing by them. And so I would just offer that I think humility is key. as a white man of privilege moving forward and finding our voices and taking the steps we need to take, both personally and professionally, to really turn the corner here.
Steve, I'm going to put you on the spot, but I think I know the answer. Well, I should know the answer. What book are you reading right now? You're about.
I'm in the middle of Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I read I read White Fragility last year. I reread it a few months ago, all my underlines and notes. And Kendi's book is incredible. That's the first one. I haven't read the other one. I can't remember the name of his other book, but that's what I'm reading now.
Yeah, I just wanted to use that as an example of just someone that's taken upon himself. And we've got a number of books listed on the website, and I just take them from Troy and Dr. Opie and what Trevor has said, and I kind of keep putting notes on the website. So if you guys have anything you found, shoot me an email. I'd love to share it with everybody.
The other one I ordered but haven't read is Toni Morrison's Beloved, I think it is, which is fiction, but based on post-Civil War, which is I've heard good things about too. So I'll share that one with you if it's not on your list.
Yeah. Trevor.
So thanks again for having me, Matt. And yeah, just every time I'm on, learn a ton from everyone. From Troy today, I learned, that I don't think it's an either and between actions and words, that both are important. And if you're going to speak out and say something, you got to follow up with actions. And also, the words are important. So you take a stand and show people where you're at, and show the minorities of our game where you stand, and that you stand on their side and you're allies with them. With the piece around conversations that Coach Stagnetta, Coach Tiffany brought up, I think that's a really interesting one, because in sports, as coaches, we can become very authoritative, where we're always telling athletes what to do, and we're always coaching, but never really facilitating good group conversation. And one book I'd like to recommend is called Changing on the Job by Jennifer Garvey Berger. And this is a book on adult development. And I think a lot of these things that we're asking of college athletes, professional athletes, are developmental challenges. And so, in talking about how do we get curious about people, we have to ask questions that kind of push some developmental edges for them. Like if they say something like, well, I'm really scared of what my friends who are cops are going to say if I say Black Lives Matter on social media, or if I wear the t-shirt or I wear the badge. It's like, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Why don't you share with the group what is most scary about that for you? So they start to be able to unpack in front of a group where they're coming from, because doing this work as a college coach, doing this work in leading teams, I've seen that especially college male athletes, professional male athletes in their 20s and 30s are very uncomfortable with having real conversation. We're very good at busting each other's chops and not good at really talking with one another. I've worked with women's teams, and they're actually much more open to sharing what is things that are most vulnerable with, but obviously those conversations are still important for them to be having in the sports context. And the last thing I wanted to say the whole show was, I was noticing the NWA poster behind Mark, and I was thinking, the thing, if you don't think systemic racism exists in lacrosse, I can't believe that this summer was the first time I ever heard Method Man was a lacrosse player in my entire life, because I was born in Mineola Hospital. I was born on Long Island. I've never, if Bruce Springsteen had been a lacrosse player, every single person in the world, it would be brought up on every single podcast, every single magazine. I've never heard in my life that Method Man played lacrosse. And I used to listen to Method Man album every tickle before every high school lacrosse game to get me pumped up. So when I heard Method Man was a lacrosse player, I was pumped to hear that. But I was also shocked that I'd never heard his name in the lacrosse world before. But thank you all for the great conversation. Again, I love being a part of these, and yeah, thanks for some of the big dogs like Steve and Coach Staggs and Coach Tiffany for joining us today. Brought up the game quite a bit.
And I'll echo that, but I appreciate you leaders and Samantha stepping in the last second, and Coach Stagnetta and Coach Tiffany and Steve, you and I go back years. Mark, it's the third time I've heard you speak, and I love what you're saying. Troy and Trevor are kind of like my co-hosts now. They did it with me so long. But, and you need them because you bring up such great, you guys catch a lot of the stuff that I don't. But all of you, you know, I welcome you back, and I keep saying this every time. I don't know how long I'll do these, but it's one of those things that's necessary. And I think it's good that you please know that you have this platform and this I don't know the word safe, but a space to just have this conversation with people of different backgrounds and ethnicities, and we all have different experiences and you know, angles that we're all kind of approaching this with. So I'm honored to have you on, and I think the lacrosse community as a whole will definitely benefit from hearing you speak. And that's the whole point of this is, you know, I love the sport. When this all happened, you know, I'm not personally a marcher. And I kind of equated like, what could I do, you know, in the game that I spend lots of time on to make things better. So that's how this came about. And I appreciate your willingness to step up and participate. I'd be remiss, I wanted Coach Tiffany to mention the One Love Foundation, because I think that's awesome that he's wearing that shirt, and it's a great cause. And then we'll officially sign off. But Coach, if you could just, for those that have not heard that before, if you would just say a minute about the One Love Foundation, and we'll let everyone go. I caught him off guard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, One Love Foundation is an organization started by Yardley Love's family after she was murdered by a Virginia men's lacrosse player. She was a Virginia women's lacrosse player, and 10 years ago now. And so they do a fantastic job of promoting healthy relationships, of having well-communicated, strong bonding, smart relationships between two people, whether it's man and woman or men and women and women, whatever that may be. But just to create healthy relationships, to reduce sexual violence, sexual harassment, and such. Their programming, their educational piece of it is fantastic, and it's all around the country now. So we're proud supporters, and we'll always will be.
Oops. Appreciate that, Coach. I've followed that group for the last 10 years, and I think it's a definitely a worthy cause. And anybody that's again, we're all around children. They're all, we want, you know, we don't want. I mean, you want great lacrosse players, but you want better people, as someone said on the show before. You know, you're all affecting people, so you want to have better people in those kind of programs. So again, thank you all for participating. Thank you those that watched. Next week we'll be back again with an interesting panel that we have with some international folks that we're kind of gathering together. So until then, be well and remember to be kind to each other. Pose a question to the panel by emailing us at ot@emwf.org. We'd love to hear from you.